You were born in Bampton.
On Mill Green.
There's 2 cottages there now.
Mm-hmm.
How many were there when you were born? Was it still 2?
About 4 or 5.
Oh, that was 4 or 5.
And I was in that little bit.
Yes.
You know, it goes down, doesn't it? That's
yes.
where I was born. I can't remember how many people there were, but I know there were 5 cottages.
5 cottages for 5 families.
Yes.
Amazing. Did it flood then?
Oh yes.
Every year?
Every year. My grandmother lived across the water, you know, where, I don't know who lives there now. Before you go over the bridge, a little path that goes round by the river.
Eleanor Hollowbones.
That's right, yeah.
House, yes.
My other grandmother lived there.
Yes.
And it used to come in up through the floor before it came in the door.
So that was a regular thing, you just took that for
Absolutely, every year. My granny used to move all, when they knew, it's Whitsuntide usually, when it flooded.
Was it? Yeah.
And she used to move everything upstairs or on top of tables or whatever. Yeah. And I can remember they had a big black open fireplace. And when the floods had gone down, it was all red with rust, so far to where the water had come, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And she used to black it again.
Black lead, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What did your father do?
When he was 16, he went to work in London. He worked for Harvey Nichols, and he was an errand boy, delivering fur coats and things like that, you know. Yeah. And then he got a bit fed up with that. So when he was 17, he and a friend went off to Australia, and they worked on a sheep farm. Yeah. And my father then was drafted into the Australian Army. Yes. Fought in the First World War. Yes. Was wounded very badly, and they put him in a ditch, and they said, "Oh, the Red Cross will find you, or somebody will find you." Well, he was picked up, but unconscious, and you know, brought back to England. And he was in hospital for a year over here. He was posted as dead in Australia, and we have well, my daughter has a picture of the war memorial with his name on it, F.H. Tanner. Yes, and then during that time, while he was back in England, because he was 9 years older than my mother, you see, so they were both born in Bampton, so they didn't really know each other. But they met while he was, eventually when he came home on sick leave from the hospital.
When he came back to Bampton?
That's right.
Yeah.
And he knew he'd got to go back to Australia to get himself demobbed. And so he said, would she marry him and go to Australia with him? And she said, I'm not going on any boats. So he had to go all the way back to Australia to get demobbed. And he came back here after he was demobbed. And I've still got his bank book with a shilling in it, an Australian bank with a shilling in it.
Is that the Queen shilling or the King shilling?
I don't know, but there's a shilling. He'd drawn out the money and just left 1 shilling in it, you see.
Right,
So I think at one time he thought they would probably go back, but he didn't.
Yes, so he stayed in Bampton then?
So then he stayed in Bampton, and he worked at Morris's, as it was.
Yes.
They're making the Morris cars.
It was quite a big employer, wasn't it, Morris?
He used to cycle to Oxford every day, and I can remember him coming home with his hands absolutely frozen. My mother had some hot water for him to put his hands in. And then there was a man that lived in Bampton called Joe Cook, who was a leather maker. He also worked there and used to cycle. And he made, you know, the old leather gauntlet gloves? Yeah. Well, he made some leather gauntlets that fitted on the handles of the bike, so that they could put their hands in, you see, and keep their hands warm.
Fantastic.
And then...
Was that, just go back to him, was that a sort of traditional, because I know that Bampton was famous for glove making, or Whitney was, I'm not sure. Whitney was. So do you think that was part of that tradition, or it just was a kind of
just something he did. I don't know if he ever
did
it before, but he did lots of leather work.
I can't think of anybody who would think of cycling in and out of Oxford on a daily basis.
Well, my husband did before we were married, because I met him when I was 15 and a half. He didn't have any other boyfriends. And I had appendicitis, I remember, and was taken to hospital. So my mum knew I was going out with him, but my dad didn't.
Would he not have approved?
He wouldn't have, no.
Because you were so young?
Because I was so young.
Right.
But I was 16 by this time, and so my mother rang him and told him I was in the hospital, and they went up to, they went to see me in the hospital, and he cycled from Brize Norton to Oxford to see me.
That's very sweet. Mm. Which hospital?
Radcliffe, the old Radcliffe.
The old Radcliffe in Woodstock Road, right near the middle. Yes, yes, different times.
Yes.
Yes.
So people did cycle.
Yes.
In those days. Well, you did. It's the only way you could get about, mostly.
Absolutely. I can't remember who it was that talked about going out to Oxford on a Saturday night or Friday night, cycle to the station.
We've done that.
Train in, train back, and then cycle home again in a big group.
Yeah.
It all sounded lovely.
And Thursdays too, for the pictures usually. You cycle up to the station and go to Whitney for the cinema and then back.
Yes. There used to be a Bampton cinema, didn't there?
Yes, on a Monday.
It was on Monday, was it? I remember that. Sitting on benches and
Yes.
baking down, yes, yes. Right, go back to childhood. So you're born in Mill Green. Presumably start school about the age of 5.
No, I started school at 3. For the simple reason that every morning when the children went along to school, I'd join them and go to school, and my mother would come out and say, "Has anybody seen Vera? Oh, she's gone to school." And the headmaster got so fed up with my mum coming to fetch me home, he said, "Let her stay."
Yeah.
And I loved every minute of my schooling.
All the way up?
All the way up. Didn't want to leave when I had to leave. Didn't
That's
want to
lovely.
leave at all.
What age did you leave?
14.
Right.
That was at the Easter, you could leave at terms then, and I asked if I could stay on another term. My mother said, "Oh no, you've got to go out to work."
Right. The school was the one that's in Churchview, wasn't
Yes.
it? And a boys' classroom and a girls' classroom?
Mixed.
They were both
Mixed
mixed, were they?
classes.
Oh, were they? Okay. And what else do you remember about that school? Do you remember much
The
about
water tap at the bottom on by the road, there was a tap. And if you wanted a drink, there was a chain with it was an iron, it was so heavy cup, it hung upside down, there was a loop in the chain through there, picked it up, and everybody drank from it. I mean, it was never washed. And the
No.
toilets, of course, out at the back in the...
Yeah.
I remember the teachers had an extra one at the end, and one time we were in there, a gang of girls, you know, who'd been to the loos, and one of the teachers went in and they had the key to open the door, their door, and she opened it, didn't lock it when she went in, left the key outside, and they dared me to turn the key. And I wasn't a child that did things like that, but because they said, you know, you're afraid to do it, I did it. And we all went back into school, and Miss Walker, I think her name was, nobody knew where she was. And in the end, had to own up. I think that's the only time I was ever punished. Oh, well, one other time, punished at school, because that's why I didn't do things like that, because I loved school.
Good, yeah.
The only other time was when in a cookery class, and after cookery we all had jobs to do, and this friend of mine and I had to do the food cupboard, which had all the jars of sultanas, and we pinched the sultanas out of the jar, you see. And so somebody said, "Oh, miss, they're eating the sultanas." So she came across and she gave me a smack. And I said, "If she does that again, I shall go home." What did she say? She said, "If you do it again, miss, she'll go home." So she did it again. And to save face, I ran home. My mother gave me a jolly good hiding and took me back to school. So, in those days, it didn't pay to be naughty, and if you were punished at school,
what were the
did
punishments?
something.
I mean, you got a slap for that. What was the punishment when you locked the teacher in the loo?
Writing lines.
Ah, what did it say? What did
Oh well, I must not do. I can't remember what it was now. I know mostly I used to have to write out, "I must not talk in class," and I used to write I all down, then must all down to try and do it quicker, you know.
Yes, yeah.
But that was, we hated lines because you had to do it 100 times. You lost your play times.
Yes, yes.
The boys got the cane, but girls
But not the
didn't.
girls.
No.
No, and that's disappeared, of course. What? Tell me about games when you played at school. I mean, there'd be playground games, but did you do official games as well?
We had a games. It was rounders or netball, and we had. We all wore navy blue knickers in those days, and we had to tuck our clothes in our knickers. You know,
No shorts.
No shorts.
Mm.
We had to tuck clothes in knickers to play games.
Yes. Well, and was that out in the field, out in Sanford Field?
Yes, yes. Mm.
Did you have a school garden there?
Yes,
as well?
we did. And the boys grew vegetables that we used to cook for school dinners. Mm.
Was that in the field or was that just across the
You
bridge?
know where the canteen is? Where the canteen, it was a canteen.
Is that Edie Forshoe's house?
No, that was the woodwork. That was the cookery room.
Oh, that was the cooking
And
room,
the
okay.
barn next, where the barn house is next door, there was
Yes.
another big hut there, and that was the woodwork room.
Right.
But right at the back, there's a, you have the old
playground.
you have the old people's, where the
Yes,
old people go.
so
Then there's that piece along the bottom.
Okay.
Well, part of that bit of playground and all of that, and some of the field, that was the school garden then.
And very productive by the sound of it.
And
Yeah.
but the boys grew vegetables and they were used for meals.
Yes, but not the girls.
No, girls did sewing when the boys did.
Yeah. Did you do woodwork?
No.
No. Very much divided then, wasn't it?
Needlework and cookery for the girls, and gardening and woodwork for the boys.
Yes, yes. What else do you remember about school? Remember the teachers?
Oh yes. I just moved out of the infants class when Miss Farmer came.
Oh, so you never were
No,
taught by her?
No, I wasn't taught by Miss Farmer. We had Miss Walker, who used to live in that little, you know, the two little cottages by the drive where you go into Reed's farm.
Yes.
She lived in one of those.
Yes.
Miss Lutner used to cycle every day from Long Hanborough. She was the my infant teacher when I was at school.
Summer and winter.
Mm. And then we had a Mrs. Gom who used to come on a motorbike from Whitney. Miss Hobbs, of course. Oh, I adored Miss Hobbs.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, she used to live in Bridge Street, didn't she?
Yes, she was lovely. Miss Irving, she died very young. She married a soldier, one of the signals I think he was. And she had some kidney problems and she died young.
Yeah.
While she was at this school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we had a Mr. Mathis and a Mr.
And who was the headmaster for you?
Mr. Fry.
Mr. Fry.
Mm.
Was he a fearsome headmaster?
Very.
Oh, was he?
Very fearsome. And to this day, you know, in prayers, when you say with Jesus' name in it, we always have to bow our head at Jesus. And I still do it. And if you didn't do it, he'd come along and he'd hit you on the back of the head. That, you know, because you hadn't done it. Very, very strict he was.
Yes.
Everybody was afraid of him.
Yes. Was religion much of a part of school?
Yes, it was.
Was it?
We had another lady called Mrs. Povey who lived along where little row of cottages opposite Arthur Hill's shop.
Yes, I know.
Was.
Yeah.
She lived there, and she used to do the scripture lessons, as it was called then, and I loved that because especially the Old Testament Bible stories, and she'd do these stories and she'd leave it just at an exciting little bit, and then we'd all couldn't get there quickly enough the next morning to hear the rest of the stories. She told them, she didn't read them. Yes. She told them.
What about holiday times? What did you do in holiday times?
Well, we always went on holiday to London. I thought London was the best place on earth, you know. My relatives lived in Walthamstow, which is a lot different then to what it is now, and we had some in Chingford and some at Clapham Junction. My uncle was station master at Clapham Junction, and we used to. That was our holidays. Go up on the train. I wrote a poem about it. It's called "The Holidays in London." It's all about where we went and the cries in the morning of the milkman shouting "Milko," you know, and the trams rumbling by. And I thought it was wonderful.
Sounds almost like I mean, of course, it is times gone by, but it sounds almost 19th century, doesn't it? When you talk about that, like something from Oliver.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. But wonderful. Really wonderful, yeah. And you left school at 14?
Yes.
And then?
I went to work at Bampton House.
Who was there then? It's Mrs.
Molly
Rose
Rose
is there
now.
Yes. Who was there
Colonel
now?
and Mrs. Bliss.
Oh, right. Okay. Nice to work for?
Very nice, yes.
What did you do?
I worked in the kitchen.
Yes.
Which I like cooking now, I always have.
Yeah.
So
you were under the cook?
Wasn't really what I wanted to do, though. I really wanted to be a nursemaid or a nanny.
Uh-huh.
And I remember my parents trying to put me off, saying, well, you'd have to change dirty nappies and wash them. I don't mind. That's all I wanted to do.
You really wanted to work with children?
I really did. And I never did until I went to work at the old school first, before the new one was built, in the kitchen there.
Yeah. And
then when this one was built, I came up to this school. And I loved working with the children there. And one day the headmaster came to me and he said, you're very good with the children, would you like to come and work in the classroom? So, yes, I said I'd love to. Well, I worked with Mary Farmer for 2 years, and then I went to the Oxford Polytechnic, which is now Brookes University, but it was the Oxford Polytechnic now, and did a 2-year course to teach infants. Right. And that was my dream, and I did it.
You must have been so happy.
And I was.
How old were you when you did that 2-year course?
I can't remember. But I know I started, although I'd been working in the classroom before, I officially started in 1980. 1965. Every child in the school worked on that. I didn't know a thing about it. But I said when I left school, when I retired, I was going to make myself a fish pond, which I did.
1965 to 1981.
Yeah, well that was when I officially, but I retired in 1981 because we had to lose one member of staff, you know, it was the time when they were cutting off staff, and I'd only got 2 years to go. So I said I'd take the redundancy, which I did, and then I went back and worked for 6 years for no pay at all, doing exactly the same work but no pay. Because I would have been bored to tears.
And you really loved it.
Yes. And then when my husband became ill, I had to retire again.
Yeah.
And then when he died, I went back and did another 2 years after that.
Yes, so you've done all sorts of bits and pieces, and always in Bampton School. Tell me about the teacher training. You must have been so happy doing that.
I was.
Yes, I can imagine going back to education when you really wanted to do that and you really loved it.
I learned a dance like more then than I had when I was at school too.
Yes.
That was really good.
Yes.
And I have the letters somewhere, but I can't remember where they are now. Where Bob Smith that was the headmaster then, welcomed me into the school. I was called an auxiliary.
Tell me, do you think the school teaching changed while you were there?
Very much.
And
since I left.
Yes, and while you were there?
It had changed, yes, because they'd started the open plan, you know, when you had children, 3 classes in the one big room, but no division.
What do you think of that?
Not a lot. It was very noisy, and we had 90 children at that point. We didn't have 90 chairs, so some of them had to sit, you know, on mats.
Very difficult. And I would have thought very distracting for the children.
Pardon?
Very distracting for the children, I would think.
Yeah, it was very noisy.
Yes.
And when I went to New Zealand, I stayed with a friend of my friend in Auckland, and he was a schools inspector. So he took me around their schools, and they were just starting the open plan then. But they only had 12 children in each group.
Yes.
A lot different to ours. We've got 30 in each group.
Yes. Very different. Yes, very different. Go back to what Bampton was like then. Much smaller. And were a lot of people working in farming?
Well, we had lots of RAF children at that time, coloured Americans too.
Oh, did you have American pupils?
Yes, we did.
How did they get on?
Quite well. And my grandson next door, because they were at school, I taught them.
Yeah.
And Luke could never call me Mrs. Elward. Adam did, but Luke always called me Grandma. And these little black children all called me Grandma as well.
And there were lots of people working in Morris Motors in Oxford.
Not so much then, because when the war came, my dad had to go and work at Bryce Norton at the 6MU.
What is 6MU?
6 Maintenance Unit, number 6 Maintenance Unit.
Did a lot of people do that?
A lot of them went to work at the aerodrome when that opened up. Yes, the civilian workers.
Right, so they went from Morris Motors to Bryce Norton. What about the Smiths Industries in Witney?
Yeah, a lot of people went there too.
Yes.
I had to go there because I was married, but I had no children.
Yes.
So I had to do war work, and they put me in the kitchen.
Again,
up there, yeah. That was before I, went into teaching. And then I think I was there about 5 or 6 months, and then I got pregnant, but I couldn't leave until I was 3 months pregnant. You had to, and that's the worst 3 months anyway, working in a kitchen.
You feel a bit sick and everything.
But
yes.
after 3 months, I could leave then.
Yes.
That was fine.
Yes.
But if you had no children, you had to go and do some sort of war work.
Yes. Tell me about the war in Bampton. What impact did that have? You had extra children in the school, you had American children in the school.
And evacuees.
And the evacuees.
Yeah.
They come into the school as well?
Yes, but I wasn't teaching then.
Oh, okay.
No.
They were mostly from the East End of London, weren't they?
When I was working at Mrs. Bliss's then, and we had 6 evacuees there, and a schoolmaster and his wife. And I kept in touch with one of the children when he left. When they were 14, they went back.
Yeah.
Even if the war was still on, they did to go back. And he went into the Marines because he got old enough to go into the Marines. Then he became engaged to a young girl called Connie Penn, and Connie used to write to me as well as Alfred. And then they were married, and I went up to Bow to the wedding, and they had their first child, and I was living in Foxclose then, and they named her Jean, after the same as my Jean. And they had 5 more children, and they used to come down and visit. And then they moved from Bow to Dagenham. He was going to work at the Ford Works at Dagenham. Yes. And I had a letter to say they were moving to Dagenham. And I had a Christmas card that year, but no address. And I've lost touch. There was a letter in the Beam some couple of years ago from a girl who said her brothers were evacuated to Bampton. And their names were Eric and, I can't remember, my memory's not very good these days.
Yeah, you're doing all right.
But anyway, the 2 brothers, and they were two boys that were where I worked, Mrs. Bliss's. So I wrote back to her and said, you know, that I'd remembered them, and I would like to get in touch with Alfred Ellis, because I lost touch with him when he moved to Dagenham. So she wrote back again, and she sent me 2 addresses. She'd looked down the telephone book of Alice, and I rang them, but they were neither of them were them.
What else do you remember about the war? Do you remember was it Frida Badley telling me about fights that broke out? Do you remember
No,
that?
I didn't know much about that.
No.
I don't remember that, whether it was in the pubs or out of the bar. I wouldn't know, because you know I didn't do that sort of thing.
Depends
So,
where you lived in.
yeah, I didn't know anything about those.
Yes.
I knew that the white Americans and the black Americans didn't get on, but I didn't know anything about the fights.
Yes, it sounded quite wild. Were you a churchgoer?
Yes.
And did you sing in the choir?
No, I didn't, but my children did.
Did they? Yes.
And I sit in the same pew now that I sat in as a child. I still sit in the same pew.
It was the Sunday school then as well?
Yes, I did Sunday school for 20 years.
You took it?
Yes.
Yes. You've just been involved with the children all the way through, haven't you? Really, yes.
My mother and 2 or 3 other ladies used to run a sort of canteen place in the WI Hall. Yeah. Social evenings they were called, and they used to invite the service people to it. And they used to have these special socials where you paid 6pence to go in. And I could go because my mother was there, you see. I was 15 then, and one night some RAF boys came down, banged on the door. Do you remember Mrs. Glenister? Do you remember her?
I remember.
Her husband was stationed, worked at the station.
I remember the name, but I don't know.
Well, she lived in Church Street. She was always on the door, and these boys came in. And how much is it to come in? So she said 6pence each,
which is 2.5p.
David. My David was amongst them, and he said he'd got 6pence, the others hadn't. So he said, well, I've got 6pence. They hadn't got any money, because they only had 9 bob a week or something like that, wasn't it, in those days? And she said to him, are you Welsh? So he said, yes. She said, well, my husband was at such and such a station in Wales. Come on in. So she let them all in for 6pence. It was refreshment time then, cups of tea and biscuits. That's what they had in refreshment time. And then she said to him, now, you go and ask that little girl down there to dance with you. And my friend who died, I went to her funeral on Monday, she and I were there, and she was an excellent dancer, and I wasn't that good. And as he came down, you see, Gladys got up, and he asked me. And she'd sent him down to ask me to dance. So, and he was a wonderful dancer. He taught me to dance really properly. Yeah. And that was it, we danced. And then Gladys and I were going for a walk one night, and we saw this chappie coming down the station road, and I said, that's the airman that I danced with. Anyway, he came across and spoke to us, and walked with us. And then he said, could he see me again? And so I was a bit worried, so what will my parents think, you know? So I did say yes. And so where were we going to meet? Well, we'd meet up this road, but this was Allotments then, and I knew my dad would be in the Allotments, so Gladys and I went up this way, and the boys came up the pieces and met us up the road.
Yes. Go back to working for Mrs. Bliss. What was that like? You worked in the kitchen?
I did.
How many people were working in that house?
There was the cook, myself, parlour maid, housemaid, 2 housemaids, Percy Bowerman, you knew him, he was the chauffeur. Did you know Sidney Poole? He was the odd job man, and they had a gardener that was 8.
Now Percy used to live in those little cottages, yes, opposite Arthur.
Yes.
And he inherited her car,
That's
didn't
right,
he?
yes.
Which was a Morris Minor.
Yeah,
And
they
he
had
was very
2.
tiny.
They had a big one and a smaller one, and
And
he had
he
the
used
smaller
to
one.
peer over the steering
That's
wheel.
right.
He was very small.
Mm.
Yes, I do remember that.
Mm.
Yes, it's quite a large household, isn't it,
Mm.
really, of people looking after the house.
But the servants' quarters that were then are now the garages. So that was the servants' quarter, that bit there.
Yes, but you didn't live in, did you? You stayed at home?
No, I didn't live in.
Yes,
I just
but
went
did most young girls...
all the others lived in.
Yes, so most young girls
Mm.
going into service, it was called, wasn't it? Would leave home when they were 14.
I had 7 and 6pence a week
Yes.
there.
Did that seem good?
Well, yes, it was to start, but after 3 years, my father said, you've got to ask for a rise. So she said, well, yes, I'll give you 10 shillings a week, but you must come in on Sundays. 'Cause I didn't go in on Sundays, I always went to church, you see, with my family.
Yeah.
But she did give me an hour off to go to church.
Yes. So then it was 10 shillings a week, 7
Then
days
10
a week.
shillings a week, yes.
And what hours?
And then 7 o'clock in the morning till about 3 in the afternoon.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to the deanery because they were offering 15 shillings a week.
Yes.
So
Who was there? Was that Marjorie Pollard?
No, before then it was a Mr. and Mrs. Weston. They always had foreign staff, they never had English staff.
Foreign from where?
Austrian or German or whatever, because everybody said they were spies in the war, you know. And but they were so awful to work for, really. She slept downstairs on a divan in the drawing room, and there was a carpet in the middle and wooden boards all around the edge, but I had to wash those boards, they were never polished. And the divan was covered over and with cushions and made into like a divan in the daytime, it was a bed at night. And then I had to stand there while she went round like this, making sure I dusted everywhere. Lifted up things, went like that to make sure I dusted. And I remember one day...
Did she tell you off?
Oh yes, she never did do, because I didn't leave any dust. But she, you know, if she wanted you, she would come to the lounge door, and she would stand, and you know these, like a football clapper with a clanger there and a clanger there, and she'd stood and shook that, and you had to run.
You had to run? You
had to run. And I remember once I was clearing the dining room from the breakfast things, and there was loads of washing up left there for me to do when I got in, and it was a long tray, and I carried it in, and there wasn't room to put it like that. I put it that way on. And stupid, I unloaded it from that end, and broke it. And she stopped it out of my pay until I paid for all that china. Well, it's about 6 cups and saucers.
Terrible. It must have been, yes, terrible for you. Yes. How long did you stay there?
Till I married.
Oh, did you? So you stuck it out?
Yeah, because the money was good then, 15 shillings a week. Then she gave me a blue wooden necklace for a wedding present. Just blue wooden bead, but they'd been used to black staff. They'd been in India, you know, with Indian staff all the time. That they could, you know, that's where she thought I was one of those.
A lot of beads.
Yes.
So how old were you when you got married?
18 and a half.
18 and a half. It's very young, isn't it?
And my husband's photograph and I over there, that was 50th wedding anniversary, this one. And he died 10 days afterwards.
Did you know about the facts of life?
No, I didn't.
No, isn't it extraordinary?
No, and I thought when I had a baby my tummy was going to open up.
I
had no idea, I really didn't.
So when you got pregnant and you find yourself growing, you don't even know how that's going to come out?
Well, no, I didn't. No. But of course, then I talked with the nurse. She told me all about those sort of things then.
Where was your daughter born? At home?
Both born at home.
Were they? Yes. That's wonderful, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Which was the nurse? Was that the district nurse? Okay.
Yes, Nurse Chandler. When I had Jean, I remember her. She gave I had a bad back. I didn't have a bad, you know, birth with her either. But I had a bad back all day and didn't know whether it. But it couldn't have been because it wasn't due for 3 weeks, we thought, you see. And my mother got a bit worried at night, about 10 o'clock at night, so she sent for the nurse and she came and she said, oh yes, she started, but she'll be ages yet, I'll go back and get my husband some supper. So she went off and she came back at midnight and my back was still bad and she gave it a rub and that seemed to help. And after a while, because I was having pains, and I said, oh, rub my back again. She said, get on with it, it's your baby. And then when it was sort of getting towards the end, I was getting a bit like this, so she smacked me across the bottom. She said, come on, breathe in, out, in, out.
Did she?
Yeah, but she was born at 4 o'clock in the morning, so from 12 to 4. That's
But she sounds quite brusque with you.
Yes, she was. But
Yeah.
then with Janet, I had Nurse Higgs.
Yes, that's the one I remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
But she didn't have time for anything. I don't know whether it is or not. And then it came again. I said, oh, you better go and get the nurse. And I'd been saying to him for weeks, get some lights on your bike, because it was sure to happen in the night. Anyway, off he went. The policeman tried to stop him, and he said, because we lived in those huts, you know, they were there before but you know the bungalows at the top of the road? They were army huts turned into houses, and we had one of those. And police station was opposite. I was friendly with the policeman's wife, and he said, hey, you haven't got any lights, Dave? He said, I can't stop, my wife's having a baby. And I went on down the road to fetch the nurse. And by the time she got there, just half an hour and she was born.
Where was the doctor's surgery then? Or was there a doctor's surgery, or was it just the doctor's house?
Where Mrs. Phillips lives.
Oh, Lavender Square?
Yes,
right.
And where Lady Patricia Ward used to live, Box House.
Oh, right,
Box
yes.
House, yeah, there.
Oh, right.
There.
How many doctors for the village?
2.
2 doctors.
And then we had another doctor, Dr. Wood, who lived where the Collinses live, you know.
Yeah.
What's the name of the place?
Shop House?
Greyshot House, okay, in the High Street.
Yes, there.
Yes, yes.
The one doctor used to live there, that was many years ago. And Dr. Atkinson used to live in Box House.
Yes.
He was a private doctor, people paid to have him, but he would see, we used to go to him, and he used to send a bill perhaps every 6 months to my mum for 5 shillings, you know, but he
Yes.
made his money from the rich people.
Right, okay.
Because he used to keep Mrs. Bliss in bed for 3 months during the winter. Nothing wrong with her, but he used to come 2 or 3 times a week, you know, and that's how he made his money.
So that he made enough money there to look after
Oh
people who
yeah,
didn't have so much money.
yes. She was not well enough. Used to keep her in bed through the winter. So you were running up and downstairs with trays all the time. You know.
Was she difficult to work with?
Pardon?
Was she difficult to work?
Oh no,
work off? No, she was nice.
No, she was lovely. Well, you know the bridge, the over the Millbrook.
Yes, down Bridge Street.
Yes, that coming up from Weald,
Yes.
the very first house over the bridge on the left-hand
Yes.
side before the pub.
Yes.
Mrs. Rogers lived there, and she had a sweet shop.
Right.
So that's one.
Did it have jars of humbugs? And
Yes, all
things?
sorts of things. It was in the room of her house,
Yes.
but she had it there, and she was open on Sundays as well if anybody wanted sweets then. And then Bishops, where the Bishops are now.
That's
There were
Emmie's.
Emmie's.
Yeah.
There were 2 old ladies lived there, the Sperrits, Miss Miranda and Miss Teresa, and they were always called Miss Miranda and Miss Teresa. And they had a shop of sort, but it was not like it is now. It wasn't a paper shop. They sold a few sweets, sugar, tea, cocoa, that sort of thing.
Basic groceries.
Paraffin, candles, lamps, all that sort of thing in there.
Yeah.
And the house opposite, next to the chapel,
Yes.
that was a Mr. Wells paper shop.
Is that Pear Tree House? That one, the old house next to the
Yes,
chapel?
got the paper shop.
Yes.
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 That was Mr. Wells' paper shop, and his children had to get up early in the morning to deliver the papers before they went to school. He didn't pay anyone. It later became a butcher's shop.
Oh, yes.
And then where the post office is now, which was a pub, there was a lady lived there, and I can't remember her name for the life of me. I can see her face. And there was the door, you went in, went straight down the passage, and there were rooms either side. And at the bottom was a kitchen with a huge black cooker. And she used to do fish and chips, but she did them as you went in, with great big frying pans. And you went in and you just waited while she fried fish and chips for you.
I bet it was good.
It was good, yeah. My mother used to send me there. And then, you know, Eagle House, where Mrs. Martin had the Roman Catholic church at the top for the children from school. They would go at scripture lessons. They would go off to Mrs. Martin, to her Roman Catholic bit, and come back after we'd...
Now, Mr. Martin was the landlord of the pub, wasn't he?
Yes.
The Eagle pub, yes.
They had a sweet shop.
Did they?
In the window there was a sweet shop. And then, of course, Mr. Money, you know, who made shoes. Before Mr. Money, in my time, was a man called Mr. Sufflin. and he made shoes for people.
In the same shop,
Same
the same
shop,
place.
yes.
Now that's in Bridge Street, isn't it?
Yes, one of my uncles was apprenticed to him, one of my father's brothers. And then Arthur Hill's shop, that was Kimber's Butchers, and they owned the pub as well. You know, the Horseshoe. And Mr. Kimber had the butcher shop.
When did it stop being a butcher shop? Do you remember?
When Arthur took it over, I think.
And
I think it was empty for quite a long time before Arthur took it over.
So was that in the 50s, do you think?
I can't remember, it must have been.
Yeah.
You know where our butcher's shop is now? Well, it wasn't, it was just a great tall wall there, covering the back for the Dutton shop. But the cottage where Mary Farmer used to live, between that and the shop, and Miss Penfold had that, and that was a homemade cake shop. Her parents lived in Broad Street, where Marion Goldring lives now. Her parents lived there, Captain and Mrs. Penfold. And this lady had Mary's house, and she had all the homemade cakes in the windows.
Lovely. Yeah.
Despite having the bakery there, she still did well with her homemade cakes. Then, of course, there were Dutton's shop, which was when you went in there, you could smell the coffee. They used to grind the coffee for you and cut the bacon with a knife. You know, it was a lovely shop.
That was a real old-fashioned grocery shop.
And the other side was chemist. This side was grocery, and that side was chemist.
Don't remember chemist. Yeah.
Had those great big bottles with coloured liquids in the window, that side. And then the Romany, that was another shop that supplied all the gentry. That was Thompson's, Mrs. Thompson. She left that to Fred Tongue, if you remember. And then Constable's the baker.
As a sort of grocers again?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
High-class grocers.
High-class grocers, okay,
yes.
right.
I mean, the normal, ordinary folk didn't go there, it was too expensive. Constable's the bakers, which, you know, we had our own bakers.
That's where the Chinese shop is now, yes.
And you know the house next to it, not the little cottage bit, because that was part of the bakers, but the next one, where Mrs. Owens used to live, that was the gas showrooms.
Oh, was it?
Where we had
cookers,
Mr. Quick lived there, the old Mr. Quick. Cookers and lights, and you bought your gas mantles there, you know, and any gas repairs you needed doing was there. And then the next one was the bank.
Okay. Is that where the Poachers is? Or
yes, the Poachers, that was the bank. Then Mr. Simmons' shop, and on the side of that was the butcher's shop again, wasn't it? Opposite there, where the flats now are, was the pub called the Lamb, with railings round it and a big tree. It was never called the Lamb by the locals, it was always called the Tree. And on there was at the end bit that had been Mr. Hughes' butcher's shop, which eventually became a fish and chip shop. Do you remember?
So this is, no, I can remember the Lamb.
Yeah,
so this is about at least we've got 4 butcher shops, which is amazing.
There's another one to come yet.
Oh, is there?
Another 2 actually. As you go on down Cheapside, you know where Cheapside is, those tall houses just on the left, past Mignonette. Well, the end bit that used to be Hughes' shop, you remember Mrs. Hughes? Well, that was something omnivorous, call it. He had it was a jeweller shop. The window that side had all the silver stuff in it, and the one this side had all the rings and the watches. And I can remember we used to go and say, I'd like that one and I'd like that one too when we were children, you know. And he also had a garage working at the back.
Yes.
Oliver Omnivorous Collett, that was his name. And then going around the corner from the Tree, the Lamb. Where the solicitor's office is now, that was Mr. Brown's grocery shop. Winnie Brown, you remember Winnie Brown? Her father and mother had that, and she worked in the butcher's shop, which was Temple's.
Right, yes.
Yeah, but that was a butcher shop. That was Mr. Gill's butcher shop.
Okay.
And then it became a laundrette.
Yes.
And then I suppose it was the heart of John
Temple's shop, yes.
And there was Eels then in between that. Oh, and where the estate agent, that was a garage, and before that it was a Mrs. Hutchins and her 2 daughters had a really nice draper shop. And I can remember they had like a wooden stand which was round at the top, and they had these remember when gore skirts came out? They used to be fixed onto there, and these gore skirts all around on the stands. And then after Mrs. Hutchins went, it was the central garage. The malt shovel, Mrs. Kent had that. They had lots of pigs, they bred pigs there. and she used to sell their own bacon and ham. She also sold sweets and pickles and homemade mostly, and lard. She used to make lard from the pig fat, you know, and sell lard. So that was another little shop.
It's fantastic.
And vinegar. I remember going there for vinegar. No.
Did she make the vinegar?
No, she didn't make the vinegar. She sold it in she had it in a barrel. You took your bottle and she filled it up from the barrel.
Right.
Oh, she used to make her own sausages too, from her own meat. She'd sell sausages. Mr. Chandler, the saddler.
Yes, I remember him. He's on the right hand side.
And then, you know the pub that's closed there in the centre, what's it called, the Jubilee?
Yes.
Well, they had a piece built on now to make it into a kitchen or something, haven't they? Well, that bit there was a garage, and a man called Colin Townsend had that as a bicycle shop. He did all bicycle repairs, and he had two petrol pumps outside that you had to wind the handle, you know, for petrol. And then, of course, the Dutton family, and then Mrs. Clark's greengrocery next to that, where Susie lives now.
Number 4 townhouse.
That's it, yes. Susie Robinson lives there now, yes. And then over the road where the fish shop is, that's now for sale, that was Mr. Clark's shoe mending shop. And then after that it became the fish shop.
Yes.
And of course the post office I missed out in between, which was a tall
Mrs. Reynolds, I remember,
yes.
That's what's that Wheelgate House, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Then Busby's, which had the department store, that was.
It's sort of on the left-hand side,
yes.
isn't it? Yes.
There was the dress department, then you went through and down some steps, and that was the shoe department. And then you went down to the bottom end, and that was the gents' outfitters.
Is that what's called Strawberry Cottage now?
Yes, that was the gents' outfitters there. That was the gents' outfitters there. And then where the other little shop, on the corner, what's her name?
On the corner of Bushy Road?
Yes.
Yes.
That was the furniture department. And
all
then
of Busby's?
Yes, and then they lived in the house flat above it. And then Mrs. Stroud's Hardware, do you remember that?
Yes, I do. That was on the opposite side.
Opposite side,
yes.
But before that it was one of the Miss Duttons had it as, she lived there, and she had it as a school for young ladies. You know, the tradespeople's daughters and people who were a bit better off.
Yes.
Just for girls. That was a girls' school.
That's very small as a school, isn't it?
But it was, she used the upstairs rooms apparently for the school. And then next to the pub.
Which pub? The Morris Clown?
New Inn it was then,
yes.
Yes. The first cottage, a man called Mr. Blunt lived. And he didn't have a shop, but he had a bicycle with a big basket on, and he used to go around the villages selling haberdashery.
Like an old-fashioned peddler?
Mm. So did Mr. Hill, Arthur Hill's father.
Oh, did he?
Mm.
Yes.
And then down the Aston Road, you know the new houses that have been built? You know the bungalow next to it, where Mary lives? Well, that was a house. And downstairs was a butcher shop. And the window was on the outside of the road. That end now, that was the window. And at the side of it there were some stone steps and a little door. And the butcher was called Mr. Webb, and Mrs. Webb had a second-hand clothes shop in the top there. And I can remember that.
We've lost a lot.
Mrs. Court? She also had a shop next
door. Oh, she did, I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
That was a very short time though, wasn't it, she had that? She sold wool and stuff, didn't she? Yes.
Where was that?
That was next door to Bovington's.
It is remarkable that the village, it was much smaller, half the size.
And self-sufficient, practically.
Practically self-sufficient, and all this choice.
Yes.
That's wonderful. What do you think we miss now? What do you think we lack now?
Everything.
Everything,
yes.
yes.
For instance, when you go into the shop, there was always chairs you could sit on. You handed your list over to the fellow behind the counter, and you just sat in a chair while they packed it all up. Did it for you, and put the sugar on. We bought sugar in blue bags out of a big sack. They'd shovel it in, and you'd fold the tops down, hadn't they? And the butter was in a great lump, and they used to cut that off and measure it, weigh it out, and pat it up with some butter pats. And the biscuits in the shop, I remember too. They had a whole 2 rows of biscuits with glass lids, biscuit tins that were the glass lids were facing. They just lifted them up and took the biscuits out.
No wrapping paper then?
No.
No.
No packaging.
No. Was there a hairdressers in the village? Because now we seem to be overrun with hairdressers.
Yeah, no, there wasn't. There was, when I told you Colin Townsend had his shop next door to the Jubilee, during the war, do you remember Granny Brooks? You know Granny Brooks? Nellie Brooks.
Yes.
Well, she had a niece that came down during war because of the bombing in London with a friend, and they opened that up as that little garage place as a hairdressers, and they had 2 basins put in there and just hand dried it, and they did that through the war. I used to do hairdressing too.
Yeah.
Before I did the schoolwork, and I didn't train, I just could do it. It started that I did a friend's perm one day, a home perm, and then she told somebody else, and they came to me and said, would I perm theirs, and I did, and somebody else said to me, why don't you just charge for doing a perm? So I used to do a shampoo and set for £0.50 and a perm for £1.
Right, £0.50 is 2 shillings and sixpence then. How much is that now? 12.5p.
Something like that.
So 12.5p you did.
Yeah, and then it's by word of mouth it spread, and I used to go to Aston on my bicycle, and Tanfield, and Blackbawton, and then I got a motorbike.
Did you?
So I used to go on a motorbike then, yeah, a little 2-stroke.
Yes.
The case strapped on the back.
Yeah. Right, I lost count of the shops, but I know that there was a lot more pubs than there are now.
13 pubs.
13 pubs.
The Elephant and Castle.
Yeah, down Bridge Street.
The Wheatsheaf.
Yes, where the post office is.
The Eagle.
Yes, Churchview.
Horseshoe.
Where it is now.
Talbot.
Yeah.
The Lamb.
It's in the centre.
Malt Shovel. New Inn.
Morris Clown. Yeah.
The Swan. Those are the ones I can remember.
Swans on the Buckland Road. Yeah.
There was where Mr. Day lives in Broad Street. That was a pub.
That was the Plough, I think.
Yeah, and Prospect Place. Prospect, the cottages at the back of the tall house. Not the one where Dr. McCartan lived, but the others. My uncle lived in one of those, and they still had the settle seats along with the fireplace, when they lived in there. But I don't know what the name of that one was. I remember 11 and know of the other 2.
Yes.
There also was the old, the post office where Mrs. Reynolds was.
Yes. Wheelgate
I
House.
don't remember this, but I've heard my mother say there was a man called Alfie Bryant, and he had a boys' school there.
Yes,
private.
I've seen pictures of that too. Yes. But I think that's 19th century. Or
No,
early
I've
20th.
only heard my mother talk about that.
Yeah.
I didn't remember.
What do you remember about the old grammar school? Because it's
Going there for God, we had our guides there. We used to go up the stairs,
Yes.
and we had the roof pot, but it was
Beautiful.
It was. But there was a little room on the side, and they called it the glory hole. And we were not allowed to go in there because the floor had holes in it, so we were not allowed in the glory hole. But we used to have our corners, up there.
Your different groups. Yes.
Emmie Bishop was a lieutenant at one time. Miss Preedy, the vicar's daughter from Aston, was the captain when I was in it. And Emmie was a lieutenant.
That's Emmie that was later Emmie Packworth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she used to go around with her cart on a Saturday with her horse and cart. And you could hear Emmie a mile off shouting out, "Whoa!" And we were on church parade one day, and we go.
What was the horse and cart for? Just to.
She sold groceries and
she sold
groceries and
groceries
sweets from the car on Saturday afternoon. And we get to church this particular time, on church parade. We get to the church door, and instead of Emmie saying halt, she shouted out, "Whoa!"
Forgot who she was talking to. Did she do that with George Bishop then? Was it the two
George
of them?
did it after Emmie.
Oh right.
For a while.
Yes.
Polly the horse.
Yes.
Polly used to feed. She would be serving somebody, and the cart would keep going a bit further because Polly was feeding on the grass from the side of the road.
Yeah. There was also a horse and cart that went round collecting the sewage, wasn't there?
Oh yes, that was Horace Moore's.
Horace Morse.
Mm.
When did that stop?
When Horace died. Nobody else would take it on. Twice a week, I think, they put the buckets out. And he had this sort of round tank thing, you know, with a lift-up lid, and he used to then take it down the Gog Lane and dump it on the fields. There was also another man used to come round from Witney, lived at Tower Hill at Witney, and his name was Benny Clements, but they always called him Raggy. He collected rags and bones, he was a rag and bone man. On the back he had a paraffin tank. He also sold bullseyes.
Bullseye sweeties.
Yes, I can remember. And they were good, I used to love them.
What a funny mixture. Collecting rag and bone.
With the paraffin, selling paraffin and bullseyes.
There's another chapel down the High Street, next to Dr. Landry, isn't there? Up
That was the
by the Morris
Baptist.
Farm. That was the Baptist.
chapel.
Now, was that used as a Baptist
It
chapel?
was then. And they called it Emmie's Chapel.
But they were
Because
Emmie's.
they were all Baptists, yes.
What, the Papworths or the
well,
bishops?
Emmie, the bishops, they were then, they were all Baptists. And Emmie, like she used to collect her Sunday school children and take them. And I used to take mine in a crocodile to church. I used to go around and collect them from all around here.
Did you? Yes.
Walk them all to Sunday school, rather.
Yes. The Sunday school was held in the church?
No, it was held in the library, where the library is now.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And then Mrs. Crowley came to help me. My daughters did it, you see, first. Jean, when she was in the choir, and she took it over before she went into college. And then when she went to college, Janet took it over. And when Janet went to university, I took over, so that it didn't fall. We had lots and lots of children then, because I collected them and delivered them back, you see.
Yeah.
And
How many?
Oh, I should think about 40, 45.
Really?
Some used to come up from the other way. And then Teresa helped me at one point. Mrs. Crowley came to help. And then Teresa, your sister-in-law, she came to help. And then after 20 years, I thought, well, no, I've done enough now, I think. So Mrs. Crowley kept it going for a while, didn't she, with Teresa? But I remember we had just these big chairs to sit on, and Mrs. Crowley's faith was really, really strong. And I remember her saying one day, you know, if we pray hard enough, I mean, even I didn't believe this. If we pray hard enough, I'm sure that we'll be able to get some small tables and chairs. You know, and she used to say, I'm praying for our tables and chairs. And one day, someone gave us a whole load of little long coffee tables that stacked on top of each other and little tiny chairs.
So there you go.
For the Sunday school.
Fantastic. Yes, very nice. Did it go down then? Because it's very active now, the Sunday school.
Yeah, well, we had two vicars who were really not, well, when I was doing it, the vicar never came near.
Which vicar was that?
Vicar Daw.
Uh-huh.
He didn't come near it at all. And then when I left, the next vicar was Scott. He wasn't really interested in the children, was he, at all? It just fell apart then. Nobody would do it.
It's very active now. Yes, very. The vicarages have changed, haven't they? Because the vicarage used to be Cobb House, but that was way
That's
back.
right, yes.
Then it was the very new house, which is along Landels, and now it's the one in.
When Mr. Kellaway was there,
Yeah.
that was when I was.
Was that in the new house?
Most Sunday school children. No, in the old,
in the old Cobb House, yeah.
And they had a place they called the Parlour there, and that was a room for the village children, and they had cocoa in there. They had drinks that they could make, cocoa and tea and biscuits. It was always kept in there, and they could just drop in any time, books to read, things to write. And
that's very caring, isn't it?
My children, they used to often say, "Oh, we're going to the vicarage, Mum." And I knew where they were, and I knew they were there. And they used to go on a Saturday afternoon and help him with his gardening. Lots of the children did. You know, they were so good with children.
Was it him and his wife, both of them?
Yes.
Yes. That's very caring.
But they're just thinking of starting up another thing for the 13 to 18s, aren't they? And
when
I was young, we had a thing called the Torchbearers, and we used to meet in where the library is.
Yeah.
And Vicar's wife used to take us, and we did needlework and knitting, and that was all sold eventually for the Bible Society or something, you know, for missionaries.
Yes, so that was all part of the church.
That was part of the church. And Mr. Eden, who was a woodwork master at the school, he had the boys there, and they made things, woodwork and all sorts of things, and theirs went to be sold for the missionaries as well. That was quite a thriving church club.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was just called the Torchbearers.
Yes.
Had a little
both boys
badge with the torch, you know.
Yes. And I think they're lacking a youth leader at the moment for the older children.
But I didn't ever allow my children to go to the youth club here when they were young.
Well, was there also a youth club then? There was the Torchbearers, which was church, and was there a youth club as well?
There was a youth club when my children were young.
Right.
But I didn't ever let them go because it was quite rough and, you know, so I didn't ever let them. They held it against me because I didn't let them go. And they didn't walk the streets like a lot of them did either. No, there was none of that. I was never allowed to, and they weren't. Years ago, we used to have a flower show at Colville's. Do you remember?
No,
you don't remember that.
No.
They used to have a, you know, the field just past the entrance to the house on the Canfield Road. There's a field next to that. They had them in there, a flower show.
What did they have, in a marquee or what?
Yes, there was a marquee, I think.
Yes.
Just for the exhibits, but I must have been very young when that happened because it's a very long time ago. And they used to have floats then.
Yes. What was that for? It was
just a parade for the day.
Just a parade for the day. That one's gone, hasn't it?
Yes.
What other things can you remember?
Used to be country dancing classes every week. Don't have that anymore.
Who took those?
Mrs. Pratt. Remember Mrs. Pratt? She was a school teacher at Bampton. And then there was
youngsters that go and the old ones don't.
Mrs. Cope with her ballet school. She had a ballet. Do you remember her?
No, no.
My girls both went to that.
Where was that held? Village Hall?
In the village hall, yes.
Yeah.
There were quite a lot of children in that. They wore little straight white tunics with splits up the sides. Whist drives. I used to go to whist drives.
I think they still go on. I'm not sure.
Not in Bampton though, do they?
Okay.
No.
I know. Well, they play. There's a bridge club, isn't there?
Yes, there's a bridge club
yes,
there. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. What else can you remember? Yeah, well, I mean, there was the Garlands, which happened then, and that just survived.
Just survived. Yes, I've got pictures of that right back from when my elder daughter was 5, and she's 65 this year. And I've got photos going back.
Yes.
Right up now to my grandchildren, great grandchildren. I made theirs the first time last year for my great grandchildren.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Because I always did my children's ones, and then when they got too old, I did it for friends.
Yes.
For their children.
I think there was one year quite recently when nobody turned up and Ruth rushed back.
So what I do now each year, I go to the school, give a demonstration, and I make all the frames and I give them out. I didn't go and do the demonstration last year, but I made all the frames and gave them out because lots of people won't go and look or find the right wood for the frames, which has to be willow.
Yes.
Willow or nut, hazelnut, that will bend.
Yes. Yes.
So I make the frames each year, and then Janet takes them to school and she sends a note out, and it has to be Mum that says, because all the children would say yes and they'd take them and wouldn't do them.
Yes.
So if the mum sends back and says yes, she's going to do one, then they get a frame.
Yes, fantastic. So how many have we got doing it now?
I made 16 frames last year. I don't think quite all of them were used. But,
well, that's good, isn't it?
But the year before, there were 21, I think.
Yes. Oh, that's very good. That's healthy numbers, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, when you give up doing the frames, who's going to do them then?
Oh, I expect the girls will do it then.
Will they?
My mother wouldn't allow me to do it until she couldn't do it anymore, because she always did it, you see, for my children.
Yes.
And she wouldn't allow me to do it till she couldn't do it. So then I took it over. I mean, the girls have watched and helped so many times, they'd be able to do it as well.
Yes, yes. So there'll be somebody to take over. Yes, that's something you have to make sure of, isn't it?
Keep it going,
somebody to take it over. Yes, yes. We had a drama group in the village, didn't we?
Oh, I used to be in the drama group many years ago. Okay. And we used to do it, I think it was 2 nights. And I've got some pictures of I'll look them out and show them to you. Of the audience too. People, Edie Bishop was so young then, they were part of the audience.
Yeah. Yes. Do you think that it's like John Quick said when he started Spadgers, that television was going to kill everything off and you have to make an effort to keep things going? Do you think it's because of television or what?
I think it probably is, yes.
Yeah, it's too easy to be entertained, isn't it?
Yes, because we didn't have a television until the coronation. That's when we
first. Yes, a lot of people got it then, didn't they, for that? Yeah. You talked about playing the piano, and I can see there's a keyboard there.
Grandson Luke, from next door, he bought me that one Christmas. Because I couldn't bring my piano when I moved here because there just wasn't room.
Where did you learn? Did somebody teach you in the
Yes, I
village?
had lessons.
Yes.
And Mrs. Hunt, her name was,
Yeah.
that taught me.
Did lots of people have pianos and learn to play? Or?
They did then, yes, because Miss Taunt used to teach, and she was full up and couldn't take me, and so Mrs. Hunt took me and taught me.
Where did Miss Taunt live?
In Broad Street, Eton
Villas.
Villas. Then there's another house, and then the other one tacked the other side of it. It used to be the dairy.
Yes.
Then
Mr.
there's
Ray.
Doris Green.
Yeah.
Doris Keylever, and then it's a house next to that, a little
Right.
sort of little house,
Yes.
house there.
Yes. Yes.
And my music teacher lived the opposite side of the road.
You remember her?
Yes, I do.
Yes. But you obviously loved it because you.
I wanted to play. My father made my sister learn too, because he'd never do more for one than what one did the other had to. And she didn't want to learn, and she didn't really learn at all, but I wanted to, and she didn't. But he made her do it. But my father was a bit too strict, because he said I should practice for an hour every night, and he'd stand over me. And I didn't like the practice part of it because it went on too long. And I can remember that if he wasn't there for a minute or two, I'd hop up, shove the hands of the clock forward, go back and play. And then my mother would say to me later on, "You naughty girl, you put that clock on again." I didn't notice. Because when you've practiced it 2 or 3 times, that's it. You know. But he used to stand there. My father was musical, although he couldn't play a musical instrument. He was very interested in music.
Did he sing in the choir?
No,
Oh.
no. My daughters did, and
Yeah.
my grandsons, until they considered themselves too big to go in the choir.
Yes. Yeah. That's something else that's went right down. I think it's come up again now.
Yes.
It's quite healthy in numbers, which is good, isn't it? Can you remember anything else about sort of village entertainment that went on then?
Any of those socials I told you about, but then they were wartime things. There was cinema on a Monday.
Is that in the village hall too?
That was in the village
Tell
hall.
me a bit about that.
That was every Monday.
Every Monday?
Every Monday. Somebody from Farringdon came and showed a film. It used to break down, and all the children used to shout until it started up again. But I remember my father used to go to that and take Jean, who was little, and the film Gone with the Wind was on. And I got so worried because they hadn't come back. But it's a long 3-hour film, wasn't it?
I just went once to the one in the village hall. I think, as far as I remember, hard wooden benches.
That's right.
It was not that comfortable.
No.
But it was full up. And now we have it once every other month. That's once every 2 months. It's not bad, 50 or 60 people, but compared to the time you're talking about, it's quite different.
Oh, it was absolutely packed on the Monday nights, then.
Important event. We were just talking to Graham on the way in, and he was saying that your mother had a fantastic knowledge of plants and herbal remedies and all this kind of thing.
She used to sing a song, and I wish we'd written it down, and it was about everything that you had in the larder, and it all rhymed, you know. And I can't remember it, and she didn't write it down.
About plant? Was it about plants?
No, I'm talking about ingredients now in the larder. Yeah.
Yes.
But she was a great gardener. She knew everything about plants.
Yes.
And she'd go out with her little truck, and if she knew, usually at where the fire station is now, that was the old bowling green, lots and lots of molehills. So she'd take her truck and she'd get this soil from the molehills because that was good for potting.
Yes, lovely, crumbly soil, yes.
She kept birds too. I don't know if I told you that, did I? She started off with a couple of budgerigars, and she made a small aviary outside for them, and then she expanded. She got more budgerigars, and then she got some parakeets, and then she got some Java sparrows, and I can't think of the other one, but she made herself a most beautiful aviary. She bought the wire and bought the wood, and made it all herself.
Fantastic.
And they had a flight, and then there was a double entrance. You went in this bit and closed the door before you went in that bit.
Yeah.
And in the winter, in the autumn then, I had to go round every time and help her put polythene all around. She covered, the run all around with polythene to keep them dry and warm in the winter.
Yes. No.
And her lawn when she was too ill to do it and I had to do it, all over the lawn there were pots. So you had to take all these pots off, line them all up on the path, mow the lawn, and then put them back in their bare places. And you had to put it in the right place. You had to, you know, that doesn't go there, that goes there, and that one should go over there. Very particular about where they went.
But you've got a garden full of pots as well. But
yes,
yes.
Well, it's easier for me to pot garden than to
and to dig and everything.
I can't dig it.
Yes. There was never a market in the village
not in my memory.
No.
There was, but not in my memory.
Yes.
Used to be around the town hall. We did have. Do you remember we did have a little market that opened up in front of the Jubilee, didn't we? For a while, but I don't know why that stopped.
We had a May Day one.
No, there was a market that used to come every week, and they put up their stalls in that little bit of ground by the Jubilee.
Yes.
Yes, because I got some nice venison from them.
Yeah, there was a butcher there, but I think it was something to do with planning or something or other that they were stopped from doing it.
We could do a farmer's market again, but it needs somebody to organise it. We did a one-off.
There was a flower man that used to come, wasn't there?
Yes.
With flowers and the meat and other things.
And now we've just got the kebab van. And I think that's it, yes.
Back in the 80s, there was a big push for adult literacy, and you taught somebody to read.
I did.
You?
I went to Whitney College, you know, and did a course, and I taught adults to read. That was quite interesting. The first lady I had was RAF wife from Carterton, and she could neither read or write. And her children were of the age where they needed help, and if Dad wasn't home, she couldn't help them. She had a sister in America that she couldn't write to, she couldn't read if she had the letters. So I taught her from absolute scratch the way you taught infants at school. She was with me for 4 years, and by that time she was reading, writing. She read my school. I kept my school books, you know, that I had when I was a child. And she used to borrow those and read them because she didn't know any of those stories, the Katie did books and all those sort of things. And I taught her, and I taught her. Her daughter was a bit slow, and so the daughter used to come with her mother, and I used to do exercises for them to do, you know, English exercises, which they did. And then I had a couple of local boys that came to me, and when I was teaching, I remember they didn't want to learn, and that Bob Smith was there at that time, and he was very modernistic in his ideas, and he said, don't worry about them, just leave them. He said, when they see all the other children doing it, they'll want to do it. But they never did. And one of them was, when we had the garage down there, one of them was going to work, well, was working in the garage, and but he couldn't do the writing, you know, to do with the work, and he came to me, but he stuck it about 6 weeks and then backed it in.
So you didn't succeed in that?
They wouldn't concentrate, they wouldn't do it.
But the one that you did,
the most successful one.
Sounds wonderful. That must have been really gratifying.
Pardon?
Must have been really gratifying to
Yes,
teach her.
she was the most successful. Lots of them started but didn't continue.
Yes.
I think their idea was, oh well, this is for children, not, you know.
Yes, the problem
but then
is
you have to start at the bottom if you can't read.
Yes, yes, and there are no beginners' books for adults, are there?
No.
No, they're all Janet and
No, I had
John,
to make all my own stuff, all my own things. Admittedly, they lent me books from school as well.
Do you remember what you did as a child for sort of helping? I mean, as a child I used to help with harvest, for example, because everybody did in my community, not here, but I wondered if you did that as well.
No, what we used to do, my mother used to do potato picking, and we used to go along and do that too. And also we used to go leasing, as we call it, you know, when the field had been cut and the stooks like that. There were lots of bits, and we used to go and collect them, hold them by the heads, and then tie them up into, like, for the chickens. Yeah. We did that. I had to help in the garden. I had to help my father in the garden as well. I had to do the watering and the weeding. I hated it then, but I don't mind it now. I mean, I love weeding now, because you can see what you've done, can't you?
Yes. And it lasts longer than housework, doesn't it?
So many buckets of water in the marrows, so many buckets of water on the runner beans. My father used to grow his marrows in a marrow pit. Lots of people build them up, don't they? But he dug a circle, put the earth around the edges, dug lots of manure into the circle, planted them in the circle, and then when the runners came, they trained them up over the edges. But you'd always got that circle for the water to go into, stay in there rather than run off onto the garden.
And of course, most people had a vegetable patch, didn't they?
Yes, and an allotment. We did too. My husband did.
You had both. You had an allotment as well.
Yes.
Was that in the same place that it is now?
It was here where these houses are.
Oh.
We did have one where they are now.
Yeah.
But the one we had was very heavy clay. So as soon as there was one available here, we had this one. And
So
we didn't buy it.
Isn't clay here?
No, it's beautiful, beautiful soil here.
Oh, you're lucky. You could make pots with the stuff in our garden.
Well, in Culver Close it was like that, but this is just a seam of really good soil where these are, where the allotments were. But this part here, where we are, exactly here, my uncle used to have the whole piece that went right through to the pieces, because it was all up and down like that, you know, where they dug pits and taken gravel out.
Oh, yes.
So he kept chickens and goats and ducks and things in there.
Almost everybody kept a few chickens and a pig, didn't they? Yes.
Yeah, my father had chickens, ducks, pigs, rabbits.
Yes. Yeah.
We had chickens when when I was myself had chickens. And I used to buy day-old chicks and bring them on. You know, 'cause they were very cheap, about twopence or threepence each in those days.
It's a wonderful self-sufficiency, isn't it? Yeah.
But all my married life, I didn't buy any vegetables at all until after my husband died. We'd just go in the garden and pull them up, dig them up, cut them, whatever.
Did you do preserving and bottling? And
Oh
all
yes,
that stuff?
bottling. The bottles, you know, that you had to put in the pan and of boiling water after you'd sealed them down and boil them for so long. Fruit I used to do. I used to do carrots, but it was such a fiddling job. You know, when you thin out the carrots and they're very small, I used to do those, but that was such a fiddling job. Rhubarb I used to do, plums, jams of all sorts. I still make jam today. And
eggs? Did you preserve eggs?
Yes, in water glass.
Yes.
In a bucket, you know, that used to go all hard and not solid, but
Was it isinglass?
gooey around them, you know, as they dried out.
Was it isinglass you put in?
Yes. We called it water glass, I don't know.
No.
Used to mix it up with hot water first and then add cold. And when it was cold, then you put the eggs in.
Yeah. Well, pickles and things like that. Did you do
Yeah,
pickles?
used to do pickles, chutneys, green tomato chutney. But people don't do it because you've got fridges and freezers. They don't do it now, do they? But I do always make jam every year.
I have a feeling the fashion is coming back to do
And
it.
marmalade I make. I
Yeah.
still make marmalade.
Yeah. What about games that you used to play as a child?
As a child, hopscotch, skipping, hoops. I had a hoop. I had a wooden one and I also had a metal one with a hook attached to it and a handle. So you had to hold it and then push it to start, and then you just ran with holding the handle like that rather than hitting it with a stick. And had both of those. And with the tops, we used to have spinning tops, and we'd either colour the tops with different circles of chalk or stick bits of paper on them so that they made a pattern when they spun.
Did you use a leather thong on a stick to
No,
whip them?
just a piece of string.
A string. What shape were yours? Were they like a mushroom?
Had a
or
carrot
like
one and a mushroom, both.
Yes.
Did you knit?
Yes.
And did you do French knitting
Yes.
with a cotton
Lots
reel?
of that. We used to make mats with that.
Yes, yes. I don't know if children, but you don't get wooden cotton reels anymore, so it's hard to make the cotton reel dolly.
I did have a wooden one, and that great granddaughter there, Anna, I showed her how to do French knitting. Sewing. My mother used to cut out the doll's clothes for me, and we used to sew the doll's clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, my father had an overcoat once. I remember it was a check on the outside and sort of a tartan on the inner, you know, underneath the lining. And she took that all to pieces, unpicked every bit of it, and cut out and made me a coat from it and turned it the other way around to make it tartan. And we had also, going back to things we did as I was older, we had Mothers' Union, which I belonged to until we were all too old, and it died out. We then became house, I can't remember what it was now.
A sort of ladies' club.
Well, sort of
like
a house prayer meeting.
Oh, really?
And they used to come here, but now everybody's got too old and it's too far for them to come up here.
Yeah.
And then we had it at Eileen Dring's house, but Eileen's been poorly, so we haven't had it for a year or so now.
But was that religious?
That was to do with the church, yes.
Was it? And was the Mothers' Union to do with the church?
The Mothers' Union I'm talking about, yes.
Yes.
Yes, and the vicar, when we had our house meetings, the vicar would come and do communion in here for us. And we usually, then we got to sort of Lady Day and Michaelmas meetings, but we haven't done it at all for a year. But you see, the younger people, I don't know whether the younger people at church might now start up again if they had someone to give them a push, because there are lots of younger people now, aren't there?
Yes.
I mean, at one time there were only old people like me in the church congregation.
It's very healthy
But
now.
we have a good young congregation now.
And a good healthy Sunday school.
Mm.
Yes.
I have the ladies' lunch once a month.
Yes, that's good.
So
I go
and
to
that's grown.
That's very successful.
Yes.
Mm.
Was there ever a WRVS here?
There was. I don't think it was centred here. There were lots of people in the village who belonged to it, but I don't think it was centred here.
Did anybody teach ballroom dancing?
A lady at Bryce Norton, I went when I was about 14, I suppose. My friend and I went to they had a village hall there. There was somebody there taught ballroom dancing. I wasn't very good at it till I met my husband, and he was an excellent dancer.
He taught you?
That taught me, yeah.
Did you ever catch the train?
Oh, yes.
Did you use that to go to Whitney or go to
Cycle
Oxford?
to the station, yes, cycle to the station and go to Whitney Pictures. You sometimes cycle all the way to Whitney or go on the train. I remember for my honeymoon we went to Wales and we'd only been away 3 days and David had a telegram from camp to say return at once. So we came back on the train and we got back at 2 o'clock in the morning and there was no taxis there then. Well, they did have, but not that time in the morning. And so we were walking down from the station. It was pouring with rain. The handle came off one of the suitcases. So David had got one suitcase in one hand and the other tucked under his arm. And I'd got heels about this high, you know. It was a dreadful night. Anyway, because I was living with my mother then. And he stayed home for the night, went into camp the next morning, and they didn't want him. He'd got a cousin up there, Vera Elward, and it was Phil they wanted, not David.
Isn't that terrible?
So that was my honeymoon.
Yes. Yeah, but you can laugh about it later, but at the time it must have been really grim.
It was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And walking down from that station in high-heeled shoes,
Terrible.
a suitcase with the handle broken.
It's funny thinking about high-heeled shoes, isn't it? Because given up on those.
Do you remember Miss Wiltshire that used to live next door to me?
Yes.
She told
I
me...
remember the old Mrs. Wiltshire too. And
Really,
Bert.
her mother?
Yes.
I remember her telling me that she used to walk twice a day to a well somewhere near the railway station to get fresh water.
Used to be a pumping station up there where that bungalow is.
Oh, is that
And
it?
yes, before Bampton went on the water system, there was a pumping station there. And do you remember old Len Hughes?
Yeah.
He used to go up twice a day and set the pumps going to give us water. And quite often we'd run out of water during the day, and somebody would go down to Len and say, "Get up to that pumping station with no water," and he'd go up and set the pumps going.
Of course, my cottage had a well in the garden, which was the water.
Most
Sandford
did,
cottage,
didn't
one
they?
of the this one, yes.
Yes, we had one when I lived in Weald, and we had a long well hook, as we
Yes.
called it. Put the bucket on the end.
I'd love to get one of those for the museum.
Which house did you live in Weald?
It's on the
You know
ring.
Workhouse Yard, when it was a row of cottages?
Yes.
Well, we lived I was born in Mill Green, and when my grandmother died, who lived round there, we moved in with my grandfather, because they'd got 2 of those cottages with a doorway between, you know, so it was, because they were only little 1-bedroom places, but they had 2 of them, so we had a great open fireplace in each room, you know, in the one that we used for the sitting room. It was so big that there was a stone seat each side. We could sit each side under the chimney, you know, on the seats.
How many houses were there in that row?
Our 2 that we had, Mrs. Dew, Mrs. Collett and a Mrs. Hunt. There were 5.
And were they all workhouse, those five?
It was an old workhouse. It was called Workhouse Yard.
Yes. Yes.
And it was cobbled with those long cobblestones, you know?
You don't remember it as a workhouse, though?
No.
No. I wonder when that stopped.
And there were also two houses along the front, which there aren't anymore now, are there? They've sort of gone into the row. But there was the two houses along the front and the row going down there. And then the other one where the Owens used to live on the opposite side. Because, do you know Joan, Josie's mother?
Yes.
She was born in one of those cottages. Her mother lived there. And a Poole family lived in the next one, than those two at the front. The old lady that lived there, Ginny Tanner, she, on a Sunday evening in the summer after church, she would collect all us children and we'd go down the fields, and we used to go through your yard, and she used to take us down to the river that way. And she was so good. She told us all about what the flowers were, what different birds were. You know, she was a real fount of knowledge. And hedgehogs, she showed us hedgehogs, told us we'd never hurt hedgehogs. And then at Christmas time, in the parlour bit then, she always had a Christmas tree. And all the children from around there were invited. She gave us tea. And then we would go into the parlour, and she would, one at a time, she'd blindfold us, turn us round 2 or 3 times, faced you towards a tree, and you put your hand out. Whatever you touched, you had. She used to hang it with all sorts of sugar pigs and sweets and things.
That's a lovely, kind lady.
She was.
Yes.
But I remember the part they lived in, it was a flagstone floor which led out to the yard, and the chickens used to come in and peck the bits up from under the table, but the parlour was only used special days, you know.
Parlour. It's not an expression that people know now.
Parlour. I remember when I went to Wales though the first time with David to his parents' home, they had a parlour. But you don't hear it called that now, do you?
No, you don't. And it wasn't much used, was it?
It's always kept, you didn't use it, no.
Yes.
It was always
High
kept.
days and holidays.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes.
Do they use the word scullery round here, or is that North Country?
No, we used to have sculleries, yeah, we had a scullery in New Road.
And how does it differ from the kitchen then?
Well, in the scullery you just had the sink and your cooker, not much else, it was only very small, and then you went into the kitchen then, where the kitchen range was, you know. Scullery was sort of the washing up place. When we moved from Weald to New Road, down the bottom, there were only 12 houses, 6 along Bushy Row and 6 along New Road. And we had a sink, but we didn't have a tap. We had a pump at the front, 1 pump for 6 houses. It was in the middle, you know, just 6 houses, and the pump was, you had to take your buckets to the pump your water and carry your buckets back. And then eventually they put a tap in, 1 tap between 2 houses, outside again, between the 2 wash houses. Because they had wash houses with the copper boiler there then. And there was 1 tap between 2 houses.
When were those houses built? The beginning of New Road?
Well, I moved up here when I was 8 into New Road, and I'm 84 on Thursday. So work that one out.
So does that make it 76 years ago?
And they were new. We were the first people in.
So it is 76 years ago. So that is about 90. It's the 1930s, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah. And then when was the next development along New Road?
The next bit was further on, another 6 houses after the first 6, you know, along this road. Then they gradually came up to the turn where it goes into Fox Close. You know, but Fox Close didn't come till quite a while afterwards. And they started building on the others, nothing on the other side at all.
Right.
Just 2 big barns at the end where the playing field was, you know, the bowling green. There were 2 big barns there. And behind the barns there was a pond where we used to catch newts.
There's the thing that's gone. Yep.
We had a piece of string with a piece of bread on it. And if you dangled it in, they'd hang on to the bread and they wouldn't leave go. So you take them out, but we always had to put them back. We were never allowed to hurt them. It's just the fun of catching them.
So that was it in the sort of Bowling Green Close and so on. Is that about the 1960s or is that 1950s?
I can't remember when that was, but I know that it was a long time before they opened up Bowling Green Close. You know, they just came along the road so far, and then I think Frida Bradley was the first cook at this school, at the new school. Because Mrs. Slatter was the cook at the old school. She was a wonderful cook. She really was. Very strict with all the people that worked there. You had to do it by the book, you know. But she taught me lots of things.
And did everybody get a midday meal then, or was she just teaching cooking?
Oh no, everybody. That was cooking for the children. Everybody had a midday meal. I can remember the pots like this of potatoes, and that were cooked. 2 pots of those were cooked, and they had to be mashed. And there was a pint of milk and a ½ pound of margarine put into a saucepan, and the margarine melted in it to put in to mash the potatoes.
Did children pay for that, or?
Yes, they had to pay.
Yeah.
But they had fresh vegetables. Beautiful meals she provided.
Yes.